Hello everyone, I'm Jacob Kaufman, I'm the nerd on the street, and today we're taking a look at DaVinci Resolve 15 on Linux. Okay guys, my subscribers know that I usually use Kdenlive to edit my videos, but recently DaVinci Resolve 15 was released. This was an important release for GNU/Linux because 15 is the first version that does not require one of Blackmagic Design's audio cards to get output audio from your video editor if you're using DaVinci Resolve. Version 15 is the first version that you can use on any standard Linux system as long as you have ALSA installed, and if you have Pulse Audio installed, you're probably using that on top of ALSA as well. You can use DaVinci Resolve 15 without owning any hardware from Blackmagic Design. Now, I've been getting quite a few people asking me about DaVinci Resolve, so I went ahead and took a look at it a while back. I actually really enjoy using it, and it reminds me a lot of Final Cut Pro 10 on macOS. You'll see what I mean here in a minute, but I did just want to show you guys today DaVinci Resolve running on Linux, show you how it works. So without further ado, we'll cut to the desktop. Alright guys, and here we are on my desktop. So I'll go ahead and open up DaVinci Resolve here. And this is going to open on the wrong screen, so I will go and grab the splash screen for DaVinci Resolve. This program is slower to start up than Kdenlive or Lightworks. Just to note, it does take a few seconds here, as you can see, to open up. It's also got an interface that is a bit laggier than Kdenlive or Lightworks, but despite that, it does work pretty well. So I think we're going to open up in just a second here. Alright, and over here we've got our initial screen. DaVinci Resolve uses a similar setup to Final Cut Pro 10 from what I remember. It's been a few years since I used Final Cut. But we do have our editing files organized into projects, so these are not stored as individual files on your system. They're all stored centrally in the same place under a local database that you're going to have to set up the first time you open the program. You do have the option to export individual projects as their own files for moving them around if you want to. So we'll go ahead and start a new project by double-clicking on Untitled Project. Once again, my system is trying to put me on my main screen. I'm going to drag Resolve over to the capture card that I'm using here, and just a quick note, normally I edit on a 4K screen. Before I had this 4K screen, I edited on a 2K screen. Right now, we've got DaVinci Resolve crammed into a 1080p space, which is much less screen real estate than I would normally be using. I wanted to do this because it's going to be easier for you guys to see on the video, but just keep in mind, normally this is a bit less cramped when it's on a larger screen. So I've got some files here from a tech video I actually recorded a couple years ago, but never edited. It was an unboxing of an LG DVD player. The reason I never made this into an actual video is I ended up just deciding this was like a $10 just USB 2.0 DVD player. There wasn't a whole lot of use of making an unboxing for that. It's not like people are going to go out and watch unboxings before they buy a super cheap DVD player for the laptops. So I archived these files and never ended up using them, but today we're going to use them to demonstrate DaVinci Resolve. So the first thing I want to note, this is how I've got DaVinci Resolve set up with its layout. The defaults are actually a bit different. There are some various buttons you can click in different places to change the layout of this program. But the first thing I want to note when we're bringing in files is MP4 files usually work in Kdenlive. And by usually, I mean pretty much always, unless the MP4 is broken. As you can see, I can open up this MP4 file here, and I can scrub through this thing and play it.
Actually, don't do that. That would be mean. Alright, so we've got a Ziploc bag.
So this MP4 file is perfectly working. However, if we try and drag this MP4 file into DaVinci Resolve, first of all, it's going to act like it's an audio clip and not a video clip. And second of all, that audio clip it's going to act like has no audio in it. So you cannot simply use MP4 files or MKV files like you use with other programs like Kdenlive or OpenShot. This is not something specific to DaVinci Resolve. Lightworks does this as well. You are going to need to transcode your video into an editing format before you can use it in DaVinci Resolve. Now, luckily, I actually started using editing formats with Kdenlive simply because it works a little bit faster before I even started using DaVinci Resolve. So I already had this worked into my workflow. I've got this script here, this FFmpeg script that, well, this is a bash script that uses FFmpeg to transcode video into ProRes. So if you're looking for a good editing codec, I use ProRes. I use Profile 3. You can probably get away with Profile 1 or 2. That just has to do with the quality. And as you can see, I've already gone ahead and transcoded this file into ProRes, so this opens up just the same, and it plays through just the same. The only difference between these two files are the MP4 file is 2 GB, whereas the ProRes file is 35 GB. Obviously, editing formats are going to take up a bit more space. So what I do is I transcode. We can drag this in DaVinci Resolve. You can see it's complaining that this is a 29.97 FPS video. I've got my Resolve project set to 30 FPS. We're going to ignore that warning. And as you can see, this actually gives us the preview here of this file. So I edit with ProRes, and then after I'm done editing, then I just delete the ProRes files, and I keep the MP4s in case I ever want to go back and make changes to the edit or look at the source footage. I can always retranscode in the future. So there's that, and then we'll also drag in .wave audio seems to work perfectly fine. AIFF audio also works fine, so the uncompressed stuff works fine. MP3s do not work in Resolve. You will need to transcode to .wave or something else, which is very easy to do. If not with FFmpeg, you can just do that with Audacity or something. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into editing. Down here is where our timeline is going to go. There's not actually a timeline there yet, but as soon as we drag our first clip down, it's going to automatically create us a timeline. You can see up here in our project bin, it creates us a timeline called Timeline 1. Now the media organization in Resolve is actually really nice. Kdenlive can do some of this stuff like adding subfolders, so you can do like source footage subfolder, and then we can drag in our source footage, which is not that timeline, it's everything else, into this subfolder. So we can kind of organize, if you got a lot of different clips within a project, you can organize it within a bunch of different folders. But one thing Kdenlive does not have that I've already made use of several times with DaVinci Resolve is the fact that Resolve treats its timeline like another source clip. So at this point, we can preview this source clip, and you can see there's a few seconds of black at the beginning of the source clip. And basically, you can make a bunch of edits within a timeline, and then you can make a second timeline and drag the first timeline in as if it's been rendered already and you're now editing it again, only you can do that without having to actually render. So with Kdenlive, I would make edits, render, and then bring the footage back in. DaVinci Resolve, you can do everything within the program, not have to render until you're actually done, which, like I said, I have made use of that several times with some of my more complicated projects like the Nerd on the Street experience. So down here in our timeline, we can scrub through our footage, obviously, like I said. We can play the footage, and we can start making cuts. So if I find the first thing that I say here.
So here is the DVD drive that I picked out.
Alright, so we'll make our first cut right there. Now I have assigned some special custom keyboard shortcuts in DaVinci Resolve. You can do that in your preferences under user and keyboard mapping. So for instance, I just pressed S to make this cut here. That is not a default shortcut. That's something that I put in, and that's also the same shortcut that I used in Kdenlive, which I don't think it's the default there either. I think I originally picked it up from Sony Vegas or something. But that's how I've gotten used to editing, so that's what I do. I've also got some other keyboard shortcuts mapped, like delete for deleting a clip from the timeline. And in DaVinci Resolve, if you've got blank space, you can actually select the blank space itself and press delete, and it will delete the blank space. It basically just removes the space. Kdenlive can do something similar if you right click and click remove space, but it is interesting how it actually, you can highlight the blank space and delete it here in DaVinci Resolve. Now obviously I don't normally edit videos with the camera's audio. That's just kind of there for a backup and for syncing purposes. So if we go back to the beginning here and we drag in our wave audio, we can find where these waveforms line up. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here, and it sounds like, yep, that's about where we want to be. So I'm going to select that. I've got escape to deselect everything. We'll get rid of all this, bring this to the beginning, and see how this is lining up. Alright. So one thing I noticed about DaVinci Resolve that's very different from Kdenlive is that it does not lock its audio to its frame rate. Obviously a video, this is a 30 FPS project, so you're going to have 30 frames per second of video and that's it. Kdenlive, if you got a 30 FPS video, it also locks your audio. You have to make cuts on those increments of 30 FPS. But obviously this audio is recorded with 48,000 hertz, which means it's got 48,000 samples per second, not 30 like my video. So as you can see, if I drag my video here, it's going to increment by frame. And actually I'm gonna turn off snapping here so we can do that a bit easier. So we can increment our video by frame, but if we start dragging our audio around, you can see it does not pop it per frame. You can put the audio absolutely anywhere you want. This is super nice. This is going to make me want to edit podcasts and other audio-only things in DaVinci Resolve rather than Kdenlive. The fact that you can have this fine-grained control over where your audio is, which makes sense because when you render your final video, it's not like the audio and video are the same track. Even if you've got an MP4 file that you end up rendering, you're going to have one track of video and one track of audio within that MP4 container. So this is very logical. and I'm just going to try and sync these up here.
So here,
a little bit further down. It also does make it a lot easier to do what I'm doing right now, syncing several tracks together when you can move it absolutely anywhere and not just be locked to the nearest frame.
So here
Alright, so that's just about perfectly synced. So at this point, I'm going to actually delete the camera's audio, bring our auxiliary audio up, and I've got Control G set to link clips, so I can just do Control G. Now these two things are locked together. Now, just like Final Cut Pro, DaVinci Resolve will create new tracks in your timeline automatically when you start dragging things in. Unlike Final Cut Pro, empty tracks do stay here when everything has been removed from them. But it is easy to get rid of those and clean up your project by just right-clicking any of the tracks and clicking Delete Empty Tracks, and then anything with nothing in it will just get deleted. I've got Control- set to zoom out my timeline and Control+ set to zoom in. However, you can also hold down Alt and scroll down to zoom out and scroll up while you're holding down Alt to zoom in. Normally, I turn the thumbnails down. You can open up this menu here, and I like to have just one thumbnail at the beginning of a track and one at the end of a track. With longer videos, that makes it actually a bit smoother zooming in and out of this timeline. This is only a 10-15 minute video, so it's not going to make a huge difference, but I also like the cleaner look when you've only got the minimal thumbnails here. So we can start making cuts here.
So here is the DVD drive that I picked out. I got it from...
I don't know why my, normally I've got audio when I'm scrubbing through here. I don't know if it has something to do with my capture card, but you can hear right now there's no preview of the audio when I'm scrubbing through. Normally there is, just to mention.
The DVD drive that I picked out. I got it from Micro Center, as you can see there, maybe.
Alright, so here's a cut we can make. Here's some silence. Alright, so I'm just going to cut this second of silence out here. Now, one big thing that DaVinci Resolve does well for me is I do have delete set to delete a clip, but I've also got backspace set to ripple delete a clip. You can see the difference between those is when I delete, I've got this empty blank space left over, which Final Cut Pro 10, there was no empty space. If you wanted empty space, you had to drag a black frame in and set it to whatever length you wanted it. But other editors like Sony Vegas, Kdenlive, Adobe Premiere, when you delete a clip, you just end up with this blank space. And just like in Kdenlive, it's easy to remove the blank space, but since I've got backspace set to ripple delete, that automatically moves everything after what I'm deleting forward to fill in the gap. Since most of my editing for these tech videos is cutting out these silences, you know, here's some silence.
Alright,
so I want to cut this out. This is most of what I'm doing when I'm editing tech videos, and this ripple delete function takes it from 2 operations that I did in Kdenlive to just 1 key that I have to hit to do that. So that cuts the number of keys I'm pressing in half over the course of editing an entire tech video. That is a big improvement for my workflow personally. So we've started making a couple cuts here. Just to take a look at some of the other functions here in DaVinci Resolve. If we want to adjust the volume of the audio track, we can do that a couple different ways. You can click on the audio track itself, and then up here in your inspector that you can open up, you can set the volume. Everything's in decibels here. You can also click on the audio track itself to set the decibels for the individual clip here. The track will set it for the entire timeline, whereas clicking on one individual clip will set it just for that clip. You can keyframe audio very easily. Obviously, this isn't something I'd want to do with this because I'm talking, but if you got music or something, it's super easy to keyframe. Anything in your inspector that has a diamond next to it, you can keyframe. So if I click this diamond next to clip volume, I can set this to -100, and I can go about a second in here, and I can set this to 0, which is the normal volume. So you can see just by doing that, after I clicked that keyframe option, it automatically created just this linear volume up effect. So I can listen to that.
Here is
so you could hear it fade in there. Very, very easy to do. I know how to do that same thing in Kdenlive, but in Kdenlive it takes 3 or 4 more clicks, and Kdenlive's keyframing system is also very buggy. So this keyframing system is way easier to use and a lot more reliable. Well, I won't say reliable, but it's a lot more stable. Alright, obviously we'll undo that because this is just me talking. And finally, one other way you can adjust the volume for a clip is if you hover over the thumbnail in the timeline you can see this little gray line that my cursor's turning into arrows up and down when I hover over that. You can just click that and drag it down to move your audio down, or you can drag it up to increase the volume. This is not very fine-grained. Obviously, you can see I move 1 pixel here and it moves at a whole 1.74 decibels. So personally, I'm going to be more likely to go into my inspector and set numbers. But that is an option here as well if you just want to make quick changes. And another thing we can do here is adding a title clip. Obviously, a lot of my videos, I end up putting text over the screen. Maybe it's not obvious if you don't watch my videos a lot, but that's something common that I do. So let's hear what I'm talking about, like around here.
Or maybe Samsung. Those kinds of smart TVs might work with this.
Alright, so I just said those kinds of smart TVs might work with this. So let's say that I later tested that and found out that they do. Or just for the sake of, it's more likely I said something incorrect and I'm putting a correction on the screen. Let's say that I just said,
those kinds of smart TVs might work with this.
and then I tested it, and then smart TVs actually don't work with this product. I'm going to want to put a title clip on screen so that I'm not deceiving my viewers. So up here in the effects library, which by default, if you've got your normal default layout here, this effects library is going to pop up at the bottom of our left pane. Since I have this extended timeline set up, I click on effects library and it just takes over where my media pool was. If we go down to titles here, you've got all kinds of different text. Now some of these are really fancy. There's actually a lot of 3D titles and stuff you can do, which OpenShot Video Editor also has this stuff. Here we go. It took a second to load in, but you can see here this is a 3D title that is like popping up and then going back down. These don't look great. They look pretty old school, honestly. The Blender powered 3D titles in OpenShot Video Editor look just about as good as any of these 3D titles you've got here. Like this spin-in glass one. They look pretty flashy and kind of gimmicky, so probably not going to end up using those a lot, but those are there and it's neat that it has it, just like it's neat that OpenShot has them. I mean, that's where I got the initial inspiration for the intro and outro of my channel here. Hey, Resolve just crashed. Alright, while I was pausing to take a breath in the middle of my sentence. Alright, we will open up DaVinci Resolve again. Resolve is not as stable as Kdenlive or, other editors. It does tend to crash, and in case you're wondering, I am using an AMD graphics card, 2 of them actually, and I do have the AMD GPU Pro drivers installed, which Resolve requires. It does not work with the open source AMD drivers. Even if you've got the OpenCL proprietary components installed, you need the entire proprietary driver stack for Resolve to work. As you can see, we just lost our entire project. Resolve does have autosave. It's actually got really nice autosave, but one downfall of it is that you do have to save your project once before the autosave starts taking effect. So I apologize, I forgot to do that. Let me just bring these clips back in, and before we go any farther here, I'm going to save this project. Honestly, you should be doing this too. This is the smartest way to go. So Resolve has something really cool called Live Save. I would highly recommend turning it on under User, Project Save and Load. Make sure Live Save is enabled. Basically what Live Save does is every time you do anything, it automatically presses Control S for you. It automatically saves your project after every single action that you do. Resolve is a little laggy to begin with, but this option does not slow it down anymore, and it is a lifesaver for things like that, where Resolve just crashes. Now I'm gonna have to go back and do this again, whereas if I had saved my project in the first place, right, so let's save it, because by default we're working with our read-only untitled project, which is not going to live save over. But if we go ahead and save LG DVD player unboxing, and we save this project, while I'm doing this, take a look up here at the top of this screen, and watch the word edited pop up and turn gray. Every time that happens, Resolve is automatically saving our project, so recording on video. Find where our cut was. So, okay, bring that back, bring this in.
So,
okay, we'll clip this, bring it back, home.
So here,
zoom this in, and you can see this gray edited up here popping up. When you don't have live save turned on, this edited comes up red to remind you that you have edited this project and you need to save manually if you don't want to lose that. But with live save turned on, this gray edited pops up to let you know your project has been automatically saved. Obviously, it would be preferable if Resolve just didn't crash, but given how nice of a program it is, I enjoy using it anyway. And it's definitely a lifesaver having that live save turned on, so I would highly recommend doing that.
so
We'll go ahead and unlink these. I don't think that's perfectly lined up, actually. So, there we go. Delete that. Move this up. Link. And delete empty tracks.
So, here is the DVD drive that I picked out. Maybe.
Alright, so now you can hear when I'm scrubbing around in the timeline. I don't know how that got messed up before, but now you can hear when I'm scrubbing around. It is previewing the audio, which is a kind of an important thing for me. Kdenlive didn't used to do that, but it started doing that with an update sometime in the past couple years, and then I've gotten used to it. So I like being able to preview my audio while I'm scrubbing through.
Best Buy. Alright, so...
Okay, so I'm going to zoom out. Let's try and find where our smart TV thing was again.
USB compliant like Linux. You know, those kinds of smart TVs might work with this.
Okay. So I'm going to zoom in, and we'll go back to our effects library, go to titles again. Now another thing, I wanted to demonstrate Resolve crashing because it does crash actually fairly often on Linux. Way more often than stable Kdenlive crashes, and more often than Lightworks crashes from what little I've used it. The text plus here is another text object that you can set. This is also liable to crash, and this one's reproducible. If I expand these advanced controls, watch this. Oh. Wow, it actually worked. Okay, well, that's normally, okay, there we go, it crashed now. So that's a reproducible crash for me. Now, since I'm using this on Ubuntu, which is not a supported distribution, basically, if you want support from Blackmagic Design for DaVinci Resolve, you've got to be using Red Hat or CentOS, and that's it. Ubuntu is not supported, Debian is not supported, you know Arch is not supported. And obviously, even though you can get this running on Arch, if you're using an AMD graphics card like me, you've got to use Red Hat or Ubuntu in order to get your drivers working properly, because AMD's proprietary drivers have terrible support actually with recent Linux kernels. So I'm not getting any support because Ubuntu is apparently too niche of a distribution for Blackmagic Design to care about. But as you can see, even though that just crashed, we've got this saved, and if we open it up, even though I didn't press save manually since I started this project, if we zoom out here, you can see the first couple cuts I made are there at the beginning of this track, this timeline, and if we zoom in, our text plus here is also still here. We're going to delete that though. I've been using the normal just text. This text timeline effect track, whatever it's called, it's under the effects library, but this text title, just simple text, it has been working just fine. I have not had any crashes or problems with normal text. So I'm going to type in, it doesn't, right? Because what I said here was, zoom out.
You know, those kinds of smart TVs might work with this.
Oh, they don't, I'll say. The smart TVs do not work with this. So I'm going to say that, and that pops up there as you can see. I'm going to change the font family to Ubuntu, which is what I normally use on this channel. There are a lot of options here, and I could go through them all. You know, you can add drop shadows and stuff. If we move our offset here, we can change the outline of the text. What I normally like to do, even in Kdenlive, this is what I did. I like to put a rectangular background behind the text to make it easier to read. This is something that in Kdenlive, in the title editor, I always had to type my text, and then I would just draw manually a rectangle over it, and then I'd move the rectangle down a layer. And I'd try and line it up as best I could. I'd try and center the text over the rectangle, but I had to do that manually in Kdenlive. DaVinci Resolve, this is another thing where it's like they perfectly anticipated my workflow from Kdenlive, because they've made this even easier. They've got an entire background section of their title editor, their simple text editor. All I have to do is start dragging this height up from 0, and it's got this already perfectly centered rectangle right underneath my text. I can move the width in, since this does not take up the entire width of my window here. So now you can see this. It just pops up with the background. I like to make the background actually about 70% opacity as well. Alright, we can also make this title fade in super easily. Kdenlive, I had to use keyframes for this. And we could do this with keyframes in DaVinci Resolve. We've got, under video here, we've got opacity. We could set this to 0, keyframe, go a few frames in, keyframe it at 100. That's how I did it in Kdenlive. DaVinci Resolve makes it easier though. I can just come down here to my timeline, and if I hover my cursor toward the beginning or end of this clip, I get the places where I can click on it to select it and make it bigger or smaller. And what we can do here in Resolve is just right-click during that, and it gives us 7, 15, 30, or 60 frame cross dissolve presets. So I can just click add 15 frame dissolve. And it just dissolves in. I can right click back here and click add 15 frame cross dissolve, and it's going to just dissolve out.
Also says,
and you can also edit how long these are super easily by just clicking these and dragging. Once again, Kdenlive can sort of do something half like this, but it handles keyframes separately from the length of the effect, so it's not as easy as just clicking and dragging in Kdenlive. You're going to have to go to your keyframe editor if you want to change the length of a cross dissolve like this. Whereas DaVinci Resolve, as you can see, I just dragged that, and it makes the entire, you know, it just scales that scales the dissolve out however long you make this clip. So we'll bring it back down to 15 frames, and now we've got a nice title.
Work with this.
So now the audience can see that what I said was incorrect.
Also says,
alright, just a couple other things. I don't want this video to go on too long, but just a couple other things. DaVinci Resolve really shines when you start putting a whole lot of effects and titles and things on your video. It shines then because DaVinci Resolve can use the GPU, and Lightworks does this as well. Lightworks and DaVinci Resolve both use GPU processing when you're previewing your video. Kdenlive does not. Kdenlive is all CPU. And Kdenlive developers have said in the past that even if they eventually do add GPU support, it's only going to be for the proprietary NVIDIA driver only. And I've got the AMD drivers, which even though they're proprietary too, nobody's supporting them on the Kdenlive team. The open source AMD drivers can't do some stuff, and that's something AMD needs to fix. But the point is, you can do effects and things in Resolve, and it goes a lot smoother. Let me show you what I mean. So we're playing this video here. You can see we're getting a stable 30 FPS. I'm gonna mute this actually while I'm talking about color correction. If I start playing this video, up here on our timeline, or our preview, you can see 30 FPS. It's green, that means we're getting a stable 30 FPS preview. By the way, this preview up here, by default, this is a dual pane preview, not a single pane preview. If we close our inspector and we open up, this is what DaVinci Resolve looks like when you first open it up here. It has two previews, one for your media bin up here and then one for your timeline. I think that's a waste of space, so I make it one preview, just like Kdenlive has. But as I was saying, obviously when we're just playing video, it's going to be stable. Now if we head over to our color section here, and I'm not going to go through all these sections, there's some like media and fusion that I just don't use right now. Fairlight I haven't figured out how to use yet. But the color section I have already used. I have never been a huge color correction fan. I have never done a whole lot of color correction on my videos. I normally avoid doing any. My philosophy is set the camera to the correct settings, get your lighting right, and just make it look good in the first place so you don't have to do after the fact editing of colors. Because I'm not a color professional, so sometimes when I try and do color correction, it ends up looking worse, or I can't even tell if it looks better or worse after what I've done. However, recently I was recording a video for the Nerd on the Street website tour. I was recording the intro for that. If I bring my file manager up here and we go to not website tour, this is what the source footage for the intro looks like. And look how yellow I look in this. I'm like yellow-orange here. I didn't realize my white balance was set wrong on my camera. I've fixed it now, but as you can see, it was set to like the outside mode, and obviously I'm inside with yellow light bulbs, or you know, non-specialty light bulbs. They're just normal light bulbs, which do have a yellow tint to them. So my camera captured me here, and I was yellow. Now I could have left it like this, and in Kdenlive, I honestly would have, because not only does Kdenlive have harder to use color correction, that if I was a professional, I'm sure I would know how to do it fine in Kdenlive, but since I'm not a professional, I don't like messing with all the numbers and just tweaking stuff I don't know what they do, which is what I kind of have to do in Kdenlive. And then Kdenlive also, once you start applying color correction, there's no more previewing. The video is going to play back at like 10 FPS if you've got color correction going on. The Kdenlive developers say that you're supposed to use proxy clips for that. But honestly, I've got a 16-thread processor, I've got 32 gigs of RAM, and I've got 2 high-end graphics cards in my desktop. I don't think I should have to use proxy clips like Kdenlive developers recommend you do. And with Resolve, I don't have to. So this is what the camera captured here for that video. And then here's what it looked like after I color corrected it in DaVinci Resolve. Just a real-world example for you. So you can see here, you know, it's not a huge difference, but my skin, obviously, it looks very different. Even the green screen back here, there's a yellow-brown tint to the green screen, whereas it's green like it's supposed to be after I did the color correction. I'm not even sure this is perfect, the final product, because once again, like, I'm not a color professional. Looking at my tripod back here, it kind of looks tinted green on the top. I don't know if it's supposed to do that or not, but I do know with 100% certainty that the final product looks better than the initial product. So this is something that I would not have been able to do in Kdenlive. I know from experience, Kdenlive, anytime I try and do color correction, it can do it, but it never ends up looking good. DaVinci Resolve, since it's made by a company, and you know, if you're not aware, Resolve didn't used to be an editor. Blackmagic Design started adding editing capabilities to Resolve a few versions ago, but this program actually started out as a dedicated color correction program, a color grading program. So they know color correction, and they can make idiot-proof controls that people like me can use. So if we close these, we can come in here, and this footage doesn't really need to be color corrected, but just to show you an extreme example, we'll take this clip that we have selected, and I'm going to make it blue tinted. So I'm just going to drag all of these sliders over to blue, and it's going to turn our clip super freaking blue. Now, obviously, this looks horrible, but check this out. We can come over here. Let's do something with our, this is a curve editor like you get in GIMP or something. All right, so we can brighten this up a bit so we can still see now that we've made everything blue. So let's come back to edit here. So I've just applied color correction, a whole lot of color quote unquote correction to this clip. Now watch this. I'm gonna click play. It's playing back at 30 FPS, stable. And I can unmute this again.
So I didn't actually pay $55 for this thing. For $60,
it's playing back at 30 FPS, and we've got live effects going over this. We can come over here to where our title pops up. We've got a title fading in and out, and we've got color correction and lighting correction happening in real time. And this is happening because we're able to utilize our GPUs. You know, this doesn't have to do with the Resolve programmers being so much better than the Kdenlive programmers, but if Kdenlive can't utilize your GPU, you know, my processor has 16 threads, and that's twice as many as most high-end processors have. A GPU has hundreds of cores. It can do things like this way easier. So since this is able to use OpenCL in real time to do things like this, we can scrub through here with fully color corrected video, and this is just, I mean, if you've ever tried to, you know, apply this amount of effects to a clip in Kdenlive and just scrub around, and it's not going to go this smoothly at all. By the way, speaking of scrubbing, if you are using a codec like ProRes, you're going to need to be using an SSD, because hard drives actually can't read fast enough to get the ProRes footage with a high bit rate off of your disk fast enough to preview like this. But yeah, I wanted to demonstrate this color correction because that is huge. I mean, I don't use color correction a ton, like I said, but when you're layering, you know, a ton of clips together, this is going to make a really, really big difference. So there's that. And the very last thing I want to show you, we'll wrap this video up. There's other bits and bobs here and there that I've figured out how to do things in Resolve that I could show you, but this is just supposed to be an intro video. So if we go to our final tab at the bottom here, deliver, this is where we can render our video. I'm gonna leave the color correction here just to show you, because I want to demonstrate how fast Resolve renders. So we've got the first two clips with no color correction, and then we've got this for the rest of it. We got our title there. And I'm not gonna make any more cuts right now. This is it's about a 15-minute video, the last few seconds here. Let's go back to edit, and actually we'll cut off the ending audio there. Whoops. Undo that. All right, we'll just make a clip here. Okay. So now this is a 15-minute, 17-second video. We'll go to deliver, and this is where we render, like I said. You set your settings up here at the top left. We're going to name this LG DVD Player Unboxing. We'll just call it that. I'm going to delete this later, and if I end up publishing this video, I'm obviously going to remove the ridiculous color correction and finish making the cuts, and add an intro and outro and everything else I normally do. But just for this, we're going to scroll down here. Now, Resolve cannot export to MP4, H.264, or H.265. I fell in love with H.265 video, NEVC I think it's also called, in Kdenlive, which Kdenlive can do because it's based on FFmpeg. DaVinci Resolve, on the contrary, if we scroll down here, I think maybe with the paid version of this, you might be able to export to MP4, or maybe that's just importing MP4, I don't know. But this is the free of price version that I've got here, and we can select different codecs down here. I've played around with a few of these different formats and codecs, and what I've found works best for me is QuickTime format, which is going to make a .mov file. MPEG codec, and I just set the quality to best. Frame rate is, resolution and frame rate come from your project. Over here on the audio side, we've got basically uncompressed audio with 16-bit depth. I used to work with 32-bit depth, like I exported things at 32-bit from Audacity and stuff, but I recently found out that my Blue Yeti actually only records in 16-bit depth anyway, so now I go with 16 to save a little bit of file size. But yeah, these are all the options here. You can customize the file name. Render speed, I leave at maximum, and you can see here we've got estimations for disk space currently used and disk space used after render. Just a PSA, ignore these things. I've had them say that I'm going to be using 130% of disk space after render, and then I render it and it works perfectly fine. I don't run out of disk space. I don't know how they're trying to calculate that. I'm on an ext4 partition right now because I'm on Linux, but you can see I've got 579.4 gigabytes free, slowly going down because I'm recording right now with OBS and Audacity for this video. But we're going to go ahead and render this. Now I am going to set the location here, and by default it will only let you save to opt resolve media. If you want to add other folders, like you can see I've got my videos folder here. This add new folder button is actually only for creating new folders within these root places that you've given it. So to add new locations where you can render to, go to preferences, and it's under media storage here underneath system. By default, it's opt resolve media is the only one. I just added another one with my home/videos folder. So now I can come in here to location, bring this down, and we'll go to our LG DVD player unboxing, click OK. So now it's going to render to this folder right here. So we click add to render queue, and then we click start render. Now once again, this is going to render with our GPU as well. So I'm going to click start render, and watch how fast that's going. We're going at 130 frames per second about. Now it's down to 115, 110 to 120 FPS with color correction. This is so much faster. Kdenlive, it's lucky if you get real-time rendering. Like if you get a 15-minute video rendering in 15 minutes, that's very fast for Kdenlive. And sometimes you can get up to that if you're not doing a lot of effects, you're not doing a lot of transitions or overlays, and you've got a lot of threads working. But this is just so much faster. And if we open up our folder here, just so you guys can see, the .mov files that, let's see, oh, we're in the wrong folder here. The .mov files, if we come over here to our LG DVD player unboxing, this is about 680, 700 megabytes now, and we're a quarter of the way through. The .mov files for the exported MPEGs that we're doing, they are compressed. They're not uncompressed video. So like I said, we've got our 35 gigabyte ProRes file that we're editing with. It's not going to be that big of a file when you render. Now, if you want to make this even smaller, if you've got limited upload speed or limited archival storage and you want to make the final video smaller, you can always use something like FFmpeg to transcode into H.265. That's something that I've done. But actually, I've started just uploading these MOV files directly to YouTube and Dailymotion and Vimeo. It transcodes, it processes faster with YouTube with the MOV file than it does with H.265, because H.265 is a more CPU intensive codec. Since it compresses heavier, YouTube has to work harder to decompress it, which means that they process my video slower. Also, Vimeo usually complains about the color space missing in my H.265 files from Kdenlive. When we render these MOV files, like I said, this is a color correction company, so they've got all the color information saved within the file, and Vimeo does not complain about that with the exports from Resolve. So at this point, I'm just going to wait for this to finish here. It should just take a few more seconds. Alright, and that is finished up, and that took 3 minutes and 56 seconds to render a 15-minute video, which is, the FPS counter checks out. That's about 4 or 5 times faster than Kdenlive would have rendered that, without the color correction even. And we're going to open up our folder. The final size of that file is 2.9 gigabytes for a 15-minute video. And we can open this up and take a look at it. And you can see here, if we full screen that,
micro sensor, as you can see there, maybe. I recently discovered a micro sensor. Michael showed it to me actually in St. Louis. I didn't realize we had a store like that, but very handy, way better than Best Buy. Alright, so here it is.
So there's our terrible color correction, and if we continue here,
you know, those kinds of smart TVs might work with this.
So there's our title fading in there, and going back down.
Also says Microsoft.
Alright, so that is what it's like to edit a video in DaVinci Resolve. So I hope that was interesting for you guys to watch. Like I said, I've been getting a lot of people asking me about DaVinci Resolve, and I was also very curious about it myself. Like I said, my takeaway from it is DaVinci Resolve, as far as I'm concerned, this is Final Cut Pro for Linux. This is Final Cut Pro for Linux. And we've been saying for years that we wanted a good Linux video editor. Now, personally, I've been using Kdenlive for years, and I will continue to use Kdenlive for some videos, but there are some quirks about Kdenlive that I have long not liked, such as slow rendering and also things like the audio crackles that Kdenlive adds on to some of my videos. Just little things here and there that Kdenlive could be better at. And it will continue to get better. Kdenlive will continue to improve, but Kdenlive can do what 95% of people need for video editing, but everyone in the world is convinced that they're part of that special 5% that needs something more. And if you're one of those people, here you go. DaVinci Resolve 15, we've got it. We wanted a professional video editor, we've got it now. There is no longer a reason that video editors need to use other operating systems. GNU/Linux can run DaVinci Resolve 15, and it is proprietary, and there is a paid version of it, by the way. I'm using the free version here. The paid version is $300, which is the exact same price as Final Cut Pro 10, and the paid version, it doesn't unlock any more resolutions or anything like Lightworks limits the resolution to 720p with their free version. You can edit and export in 4K with the free version of Resolve. The paid version unlocks some extra codecs. It also unlocks some extra effects, motion tracking capabilities, things like that. But basically, Blackmagic Design is mostly concerned about selling their hardware. They want you to buy their sound cards, they want you to buy their video cards for more accurate color grading. But I actually might buy this sometime in 2019. I'm going to continue using the free version for a while, and some of my videos recently, a couple of my recent tech videos have been edited with DaVinci Resolve. Like I said, I'm not uninstalling Kdenlive or anything, but Resolve looks really nice and it performs fairly well. They could have better cross-distro compatibility and support, but aside from that, it's a pretty darn good editor. It works really well. So there's DaVinci Resolve 15. Let me know if you guys have any questions. You can ask down in the comments section on this video. You can ask at the forums at nerdonthestreet.com, or you can ask on the Nerd on the Street Discord server at discord.nonce.co. But for now, that's everything I had to say. So I'm Jacob Kaufman, I'm the Nerd on the Street, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.